Hello, everybody. I'm Jeff Rutledge. I'm CEO of MedResults Network. In case you forgot what we are or who we are, we've been around since 2008 established as a buying network that focuses in the aesthetic healthcare uh, space. We currently have 4,300 practices and med spas that are in our network. And we have just brought on a new partner, and I'm really happy to introduce to you Dr. Gail Humble of Klotho Skin. And she's going to talk about the Klotho gene, which 6 months ago I had absolutely no idea what it is. And then once I got to learn a little bit about it, it was absolutely fascinating, the story behind it and everything. This is part one of a three-part series. If you have any friends that are interested in this type of science and medicine, I strongly suggest for you to tell them to come on numbers 2 and 3 of our series here. We will send the recorded session out most likely this week. Please don't hesitate to share it. Without further ado, I want to introduce to you Dr. Gail Humble. Gail?
Thanks, Jeff. That was lovely. And yes, we're happy to join with you and welcome everyone. Okay, this is going to be a subject that I bet if I asked everyone, have you heard about Clotho? Very few arms would go up. At the end of this, and this is part one, you are going to be very informed on Clotho gene and protein because it is both. You're going to understand why we're even talking about it. Then we're going to teach you how to bring it into your practice. And then we're going to end on a final webinar with a delivery system and how you can achieve a higher ROI for your practice. All right. I am a geneticist and a regenerative aesthetic doctor in Northern California and LA. And I have been doing 26 years of research on the Klotho gene. Everyone knows the key word right now in aesthetics and medicine is longevity. And if you look up all the genes involved in longevity, there are many of them. But nobody really wants to be stuck at 90 for 30 years. That's where the anti-aging gene, Klotho, becomes important. It is the one and only anti-aging gene in mammals. So we're going to talk about the Klotho gene and the protein, talk about their functions on a cellular life. We're going to go over studies in the second webinar, both in vitro and in vivo. We are coming out in our last study in Journal of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery. That will be module 2. And in module 3, we will cover how you can bring Klotho into your practice and benefit for the ROI. I've got to move this little top thing here. There you go. Okay. Klotho is the only mammalian gene and protein which can actually slow the aging process on a cellular level. What this means is that instead of waiting for disease to occur and then treating it with a drug or an aesthetics, a laser or a neurotoxin, we can actually change the onset of age-related diseases. We can actually change the way our aging clock paces. We all know that aging is a big problem. By 2030, 1 in 4 people will be over 65. There's a huge increase in the amount of Alzheimer's. This is taxing our healthcare system. And there will be, by 2060, the number of 85-year-old and older will triple. So again, in Western medicine, so far, often considered the very best medicine you could have, we have a tendency to wait until there's a process. Even if you are a regenerative clinic and you're listening to this, even with peptides, you're waiting to treat the patient after they have a problem. So how can we change that? That's where the Klotho gene and protein come in. We know as we age, our DNA decreases and gets our cells replicate more inaccurately. In addition, our cellular life shortens. If we can change both of these on the cellular level, then we should be able to change the pace of our aging clock. So the Klotho gene was discovered in 1997 by Kuro, a Japanese scientist. These three mice at the bottom are the Klotho mouse. He was working on the sodium potassium pump when he accidentally downregulated the Klotho gene. That mouse is the mouse in the middle here, and he dies at 5% of his lifespan with early atherosclerosis, pulmonary emphysema, renal disease, atrophic skin, and lousy fur. He then was able to upregulate the Klotho gene, and that is the mouse all the way to the right. That mouse lives 31% longer, but more importantly, the mouth is staying healthier longer during that prolonged lifespan. So Klotho is delaying age-related diseases. And that is why this has become such a current topic. Klotho gene is on the 13th army chromosome. I'm not going to bore you guys with that. But when you upregulate the Klotho gene, which of course you know you can't pass on, unless, Jeff, I'm giving you my Levi's, what you can pass on is the Klotho protein. So when you upregulate the Klotho gene, you get production of the Klotho protein. Now, this is a very large protein. This is about 120 to 130 kilodaltons, over 1,012 amino acids. In this talk, we're talking about the alpha extracellular soluble protein. Just so you know, for completeness, there's an alpha, a beta, and a gamma. But in this one, we're talking only about the alpha soluble extracellular one. This has multiple functions on the body, and we're going to cover some of these in the next slide. But it is the master switch, the regulator, the one that regulates phosphate metabolism. And we know when you have a higher phosphate level, you have early aging. Example of this is the mouse model. If you feed them a heavy phosphate diet, they age more rapidly. Calcium, vitamin D metabolism. It's anti-aging, it's anti-fibrolytic, anti-inflammatory. And you can measure your alpha Klotho soluble protein in your CSF, your urine, and your blood. What we're going to find is that it's too big to cross the blood-brain barrier. And I don't want to give a teaser here, but by the end of the talk, you're going to see that in the mouse model and the rhesus monkey models at UCSF, they've already managed to completely reverse the cognitive decline with Alzheimer's and central Parkinson's. So why does Klotho matter? Well, I alluded to this. It is basically the master switch, the master regulate. It can actually influence how quickly your systems decline. And this kind of reframes the way we think about aging. Instead of being an inevitable drift, we have now a way to control our biologic aging. We know that Klotho is reflective of your morbidity and mortality. And by the end of the talk, we're going to tell you how you can change your Klotho level. So it gives you some power over your own morbidity and mortality. With Klotho, instead of waiting for disease, the Klotho protein works to target upstream from organs to prevent disease. Now, the Klotho protein, which we're talking about going forward, is a pleiotropic regulator. For those of you who don't remember what that means from high school biology, that means one protein affects all the organs in your system. It coordinates protective system signaling across multiple organ systems, and these are working on many age-sensitive pathways. We know it works on the kidney, the heart, brain, lung, bone, metabolism, clearly skin, because we're going to be talking about that in webinar 2. We know promotes endothelial function by releasing nitric oxide. It's an anti-inflammatory. It actually prevents phosphate buildup. In addition, it's activating platelet factor, and we're going to go into each one of these individually. Okay, Clotho was named after one of the three Greek fates, the one who spun the thread of life. Her name was Klotho with a C, and Kuru, the Japanese scientist who discovered this, just changed it to a K. That explains the spelling of it. The main thing that the Klotho gene slash protein, as a result of upregulation, does is it reduces oxidative stress. Now, this is different than an antioxidant. I want you to think of an antioxidant as a screen over a window. Klotho increases something known as FOXO1, which increases something known as superoxide dismutase, and that works as a blackout curtain. We're going to find that the reason we age on a cellular level, 30% of the reason is oxidative damage. We now have a way to combat that. In addition to that, when we prolong cellular life, we have less have less of a zombie or a senescent cell load. These are cells that stop functioning, but they aren't destroyed, and they hang around emitting inflammatory signals from their cytokines. We know it's going to work on the insulin pathway, and this is a key component in metabolic regulation and modulation of lifespan. It's a co-receptor of FGF23, again, very important in phosphate metabolism, which we know is, if it's high, is the equivalent of early aging. It works on the kidneys. It regulates mineral metabolism. It works on the WNT system. And this is very important because this is not only a cancer antagonist, in addition to the chance we're going to find out that Klotho decreases DNA damage by 40%, but also when you stimulate the signaling pathway, you're going to cause proliferation of stem cells. The Klotho protein is large. We went over that, 120 to 130 kilodaltons. It is not going to cross the blood-brain barrier. And yet, in studies, we found that it actually increases new synapses, reversing the effects of Alzheimer's and central Parkinson's. But it does this actually because it's activating platelets, and they're causing new synapses to be laid down. It mitigates the associated problems with cardiovascular disease because release of nitric oxide that are supporting the endothelial functions. This is a little bit of a teaser for module 2, but this is just what the Klotho protein does for the skin. Basically, what Klotho does is it's going to decrease your DNA damage by 40%. That allows your cells to replicate more accurately. We call this the Xerox effect. So it's going to prolong the life of the cells. And then in addition, when your cells are going to replicate, they're going to replicate more accurately. We talked about the decreased zombie cell load. We talked about reversing skin atrophy, activating platelet factor, and it's a very, very strong anti-inflammatory. So this is what it's doing on a cellular level. It's doing an increase, and those are supposed to be little red arrows there. Forgive me for that. When your Klotho levels increased in your blood, you'll have an increase in FOXO1. FOXO1 then increases superoxide dismutase and catalase. And we know this is an incredible resistor of oxidative stress. 30% of the reason that your cells are actually aging. Now, oxidative damage accumulates slowly. It's not something that happens all at once. And you notice this with the photo damage on your skin. You've always heard people say, well, whatever marks you have up from photo damage are from what you did 10 years ago. And this is accurate in the way that oxidative damage accumulates and shows later. Gradually, the oxidative, free radical species damage your proteins, your cellular structures, and Klotho reduces this oxidative burden. The Klotho protein is working on the insulin pathway, and I'm not going into detail here, but this is really important when it comes to protecting cells by increasing FOXO1, catalase, and superoxide dismutase, and extending the working life of the cells, decreasing your zombie cell load, which is exactly indicative of your disease state. Now, this is probably the most important slide here. Your Klotho levels can be measured in your CSF, your blood, and your urine. They are indicative of your morbidity and mortality. Your Klotho protein level is highest in your cord blood. It's 6 times the level in your cord blood as when you're born. By the time you're 40, your Klotho protein level has dropped almost in half, and then it continues to fall as you age. It has a very short life, only 20 minutes. And there's actually a diurnal a diurnal um, shift in your Klotho. It's highest in the morning and lowest at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Older people that have a higher Klotho level, and we're going to tell you how to raise your Klotho level, have less commonly age-related diseases. Whereas if you have two 70-year-olds and one has a higher Klotho level, they have a higher onset of age-related diseases. Now, your normal Klotho level is about 400 to 1200 picograms per milliliter. If you drop below 600 picograms per milliliter, you actually have a 30% chance of mortality in the next 5 years. If you can keep your blood level above 870 picograms, you can actually slow your phenotypic aging. Now, 1 in 5 people out there listening to this are heterozygous for Klotho. They have a natural upregulation of the Klotho protein. There's also a U-shaped curve where at the very high Klotho levels, it doesn't act to one's benefit. In all systemic diseases, even mental diseases, you see a decrease in Klotho level. They go hand in hand. General aging is a disease. We already talked how your Klotho level drops as you age. Renal conditions have a very low Klotho level, and also the kidneys are important in making Klotho. Cardiovascular disease, pulmonary disease, metabolic diseases, cancer patients have almost unmeasurable Klotho levels. Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, psychiatric disorders, even chronic stress causes a decrease in your Klotho level. Autoimmune diseases as well. So this is acting as a frontline strategy. If we can keep our Klotho protein level higher, we can abate age-related diseases. Aging doesn't have to go by a regulated clock. We have the ability to change it. I know everyone here is familiar on growth factors. I don't want to go too long here. PRP, rapamycin, the mTOR pathway, that might be new for some of you. Exosomes and Klotho. And I show you this graph only because this is comparing how Klotho is different even from these other amazing technologies that are relatively new. Only Klotho goes above and beyond, preserves your telomeres. That's the holy grail of your cells. And we know you have a certain length. They shorten, and then when they get too short, your cell dies. Again, not always destroyed, sometimes hanging around as a zombie cell that keeps emitting inflammatory signals. This is not great for your system. Klotho is DNA protective. It does DNA repair. It reverses cellular damage, increases cellular longevity, is an anti-inflammatory, increases nitric oxide, and is a platelet factor activator. Now, you may all be hearing about Klotho for the first time, but the Klotho is exponential. I just this morning was telling Jeff that there's a new podcast that Tony Robbins is doing on Klotho. I think most of you have heard about him. He's a motivational speaker. Peter Attia did a drive with Dina DeBall. She's head of the studies at UCSF that are working on Alzheimer's and reversal of that. In the X Prize, which is a prize that gives certain problems and then lets people in the world solve them, there are 3 groups that are working with Klotho. We are one of them. In the last year alone, there are 4,500 medical articles on Klotho. Now, it was discovered in 1997, and we started working with Klotho in 1998, and I thought everything was going to change. But it took a while. In the beginning, all the studies were mainly for PhDs, cellular studies, but now these are all mammalian studies. And we are actually starting our first phase 1 clinical trial with Klotho Bio. So believe me, this is not the last you've heard about Klotho. This is basically the commercial development landscape for 2026. I just mentioned Klotho Bio. That's with the Abrams. They're working with the mRNA. Klotho, very similar to the COVID mRNA, where you would get a shot every 6 months. It would increase your Klotho level, but it wouldn't permanently change your DNA. We are Klotho Skin and Longevity. Klotho Longevity is working in an oral supplement. Leonhard Ventures is in the top 40 of the X Prize. We are doing a study with them going forward. You're going to hear more about that next week. But they are working with the body stem microcurrent that actually increases your Klotho level from your muscles. Klotho, all the way to the right, has been renamed, but that was the one stock that was traded on the NASDAQ, and they are working with mRNA and ALS because there is no treatment really to date. Neuroassociates, along with Chimera, are working together in resetting the time clock by using targeted ultrasound and exosomes loaded with Klotho and delivering them to the hypothalamus. Triple Helix Science and a couple other ones actually are doing offshore DNA change using AVV vectors or mini circles. We can talk about those later. Genfinity Medicine. If you want to get your Klotho level, this is the one place you can get it right now. You can get a blood test. It runs about $248, but it gives you an idea. And when you're working with your patients, you can get a baseline with them, then do the life changing, or whether you're doing peptide therapy, whatever you're doing, GLPs, you can track it over time. All the way to the right, UCSF, Dina Demal is working on Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And there are several other very well regarded institutions that are working with the Klotho protein. Okay, how can you change your Klotho level right now? The main ways you can do this is intermittent fasting. Remember, we talked about it, work on the insulin pathway. And this is based on about 3 or 4 days a week. Stress reduction, we talked about that. The people with the lowest Klotho level are caregivers. They often find themselves at risk for disease, and a lot of the results are showing a decreased Klotho level. Sleep optimization, especially deep sleep. I think you're all learning about this. Exercise, probably the number one thing. It's found to increase your Klotho level by 30% after 3 to 4 months. Now, the studies were done on mice. So since you're not going to go on a hamster wheel, the estimate is at least 3 to 4 days a week. When you do cardiovascular exercise, your Klotho level goes up immediately. When you do strength training, your Klotho level goes down. Vitamin D, you want your optimal level from 30 to 50 nanograms per milliliter. Magnesium, 420 for men, 320 for women. Potassium-rich foods, avoid smoking, excess alcohol, although resveratrol on its own does increase your Klotho level. Certain supplements have been found to increase your Klotho level, including pre and postbiotics and antioxidants, which is interesting because it seems like that would be work differently, but that is a positive feedback. Peptides, you guys are hearing a lot more about peptides. GLP-1s actually increase your Klotho level, and apelin. Okay, so you can monitor your Klotho level. We talked about the range being from 500 to 1500, and this comes in picograms per milliliter. Ginfinity is really the only place you can do that right now, and you can find that online. We have no association with them. It runs about $248, but you can track your Klotho level and how you are working with treating your possible age-related diseases. Okay, so really, the summary here is think about a world where we can change the pace of our biological clock. Klotho is the master switch. So, all of the ways going forward that possibly we could work with Klotho is having the exogenous Klotho protein that could be oral or IV. And if you go online, you'll see there's a couple companies already selling it on IV online. This It's very important where the Klotho protein comes from. I just want to take it aside here. The Klotho protein can be made from yeast, bacteria, Chinese hamster ovaries, or mammalian cells. But when you make a protein, you then go through a process called glycosylation, and that's laying the sugars on the protein so the receiving cell can understand it. Well, a mammalian cell is going to recognize the mammalian Klotho protein much more so than a yeast or a bacteria. And a lot of the ones online that are IV are coming from bacteria or yeast. In addition, we talked earlier, your Klotho protein only has a half-life of 20 minutes, so it's not going to act very quickly. It has to be a constant pulse and feed in. mRNA Klotho is one way to solve this by having your own genes produce Klotho. Gene therapy, DNA certainly, although that's not allowed in the United States, they're doing it offshores. And small molecules are something interesting. These are new things that are acting as promoters or inhibitors, so you don't break down the Klotho as quickly. If you guys want to learn more about this, we talked about Dina DeBall and Peter Addy on the drive. I told you about the YouTube, the new one with Tony Robbins that just got released. The first book out was The Anti-Aging Property of Klotho. That's by Joe Cleaver. That's my partner in Klotho Longevity. The Klotho Effect is the ultimate Bible. And we have a third book coming out that should be published within the next 6 months. Also, we are having the second annual Klotho meeting in September. That's in Miami. This is the first time that we've had a medical conference dedicated to just one subject, and that's how important Klotho is. So I hope I gave you a reading frame to work with your patients. We're just starting on this, but by working with our Klotho level, or even thinking about the theory that there's a master switch that can change the pace of our biologic clock, I think that's our key takeaway. This is what we all want. When you're ready, we all want a 300-year-old mind in a 30-year-old body.